They say that refs are at their best when they simply let the players play. When you're watching a big game, the last thing you want to happen is have it decided by the officiating. As we all saw in the Super Bowl this year, a ticky-tack holding call essentially ended the game, which was a super underwhelming way to determine a champion. When we look at how basketball games are called, the common understanding is that refs tend to swallow their whistles during big moments and let stuff go that would normally be called during the first 3 quarters. This has led to some wild no calls throughout NBA history that have had a major impact on how we look at certain players and teams. Today, we're going to take a look back at 5 major no calls and see how they impacted not only the game where it happened, but how we view those involved as a whole. Starting off with one of the most iconic plays in the history of the sport, Michael Jordan's game-winning jumper in Game 6 against the Jazz in the '98 Finals is extremely polarizing. As we all know, MJ pulled back at the top of the key and hit the shot that clinched his 6th title. However, many people swear by the fact that Jordan pushed off to get open and that the only reason the refs didn't call it was because it was due to the fact that they were biased towards Mike. I don't know about you guys, but I honestly don't think it was an offensive foul. When you take a closer look, his arm never really extends in the motion that you typically see in push-offs. But regardless, it definitely looked a little sus in real time, and if the refs had called it, it could have changed a lot of things. For starters, the Bulls most likely go on to lose this game since they were down 1 when this play happened, which would have forced the only Game 7 of Jordan's finals career. The Bulls, and specifically Scottie Pippen, were on fumes at this point, as it was their 6th trip to the finals in 8 years. Considering Jordan dropped 45 this game and they only won by 1 point, Chicago very well could have wound up losing that Game 7, which would have cracked MJ's undefeated streak in the finals. But thankfully, the ref didn't make the call, which resulted in one of the greatest moments in basketball history. And we can all sleep better at night knowing this piece of shit never won a ring. Moving on to one of LeBron's defining moments, Game 6 between the Heat and the Spurs in the 2013 Finals featured back-to-back no calls that could have swung the game in San Antonio's favor. After Ray Allen hit the 3 to tie it at the end of regulation, the Heat were clinging to a 1-point lead with 10 seconds left in overtime. San Antonio got a stop and put the ball in Manu Ginobili's hands to make a play and try and win them the title. He drove to the basket and seemingly got the ball stripped, leading to free throws for Miami. But with a second look in slow motion, you can clearly see that Ray Allen raked him across the arm as he was gathering to shoot. But the Spurs still had a chance. With 1.9 seconds left, they were down 3 with the chance to tie the game coming out of a timeout. Popovich drew up a beautiful play to get Danny Green a cross-court pass in the corner, but Chris Bosh came over and blocked the shot to seal the win for Miami. San Antonio thought that Green was fouled on this play, and should have resulted in free throws with a chance to tie it up and send it to a second overtime. Being on the wrong side of 2 game-deciding calls is tough, but I can understand why the refs didn't make these calls. Starting with Manu, the lane was so congested when he made this play. There were 4 Heat players surrounding him, as well as his own teammate in the way of the ref who should have had the best view. Stuff like this is exactly why star players elect to just create a mid-range or 3-point shot at the end of games. When they do that, they can at least get a clean look off most of the time, and foul calls are much more obvious since they're operating in open space. But when you drive to the basket, everything happens so fast, and if the refs miss a split-second call, you oftentimes end up not even getting a shot off, like Manu in this case. And regarding the Chris Bosh block, this one I think gets called 10 times out of 10 in today's NBA. Ever since Zaza stuck his foot under Kawhi in 2017, the NBA has been super adamant in making sure that shooters are entitled to their space. Even though we blocked him cleanly up top, he clearly gave him a bit of a body check while rising up for the contest. If this happened in 2023, I think this is definitely ruled a foul. And if it isn't, everybody would be irate about it being a blown call. But 10 years ago, most people understood why this wasn't called. Typical end of game stuff. Everyone talks about how LeBron could have been 1-3 in the finals if Ray Allen didn't hit that 3 to tie the game. But the refs very easily could have cost him his second ring if they enforced the rules strictly down the stretch of this game. But even in the modern NBA, refs sometimes flat out miss calls on jumpers even when it's as clear as day. That's exactly what happened in Game 6 of the 2018 first round series between the Thunder and the Jazz. OKC was down 3-2 and in need of a road win to keep their season alive. Even though he has somewhat gotten rid of the choker reputation today, this game was key in Paul George developing this notoriety a few years back. With his season on the line, PG had just 5 points on 2 of 15 shooting, but thankfully for him, Russell Westbrook and Steven Adams led a 4th quarter surge to get the Thunder to within 3 points in the final moments. They had the ball with a chance to tie the game, and Billy Donovan surprisingly drew up a play for Paul George, who was 0 of 5 from deep. After getting Rudy Gobert to switch onto him at the top of the key, PG smartly threw up a pump fake to get the eager shot blocker off his feet. He clearly drew contact while shooting, but for some reason the refs missed the call. I know this game as a whole was a bad look for him, but Paul George did literally everything right on this play. With him struggling throughout, it was smart to bait an undisciplined perimeter defender like Gobert into the air, and it should have resulted in PG, who was 86% from the line in the series, 3 free throws with the chance to tie the game. There are some people who don't like this type of play, but it was clearly a foul. Even Utah's head coach saw it unfold and almost pulled out his hair because he was so sure that a whistle was coming. Now, even if they do call the foul, there's no guarantee he makes all three given the fact that he was so off in this game, and there's also a possibility that Utah comes down and hits a game winner to end the series like Dame did just a year later, but this blown call pretty much shut the door on their season, which is a really frustrating way to get eliminated. Going back to the 90s, one of Reggie Miller's finest moments included a crazy offensive foul on none other than Michael Jordan himself. Back in 1998, the Bulls were on the last legs of their dynasty and actually looked vulnerable for the first time in years. The Pacers, on the other hand, were a well-rounded team that finally looked ready to knock Chicago off their spot at the top. The two teams met in the conference finals and it proved to be an extremely even matchup. With all of the first 3 games in this series decided by no more than 6 points, the Bulls held a 2-1 series lead and were on the cusp of edging out another close victory to go up 3-1 after Indiana turned it over while down by 1 point with just 4.7 seconds left. The Pacers intentionally fouled Scottie Pippen, who wound up missing both free throws to give Indiana one last chance to try and even up this series. Remember earlier in the video when I said it was common knowledge that refs don't want to blow their whistle to decide a game? Reggie Miller was well aware of that and used it to his advantage on this crucial play. Miller knew that once he curled around the screen that was set for him at the top of the key, MJ would be waiting for him. So instead of trying to dance around the perimeter and try and get open, Reggie just shoved him as hard as he could, which resulted in Miller getting an open look to knock down the game-winning shot and tie the series. If it looked like it was intentional, that's because it was. In an interview some years later, Reggie Miller said that he knew the refs wouldn't have made the call and intentionally took advantage of that by giving Jordan a good shove. It ended up being one of the biggest plays of Miller's career and helped solidify him as an all-time clutch performer. However, the Bulls ended up getting by the Pacers in 7 games and ultimately won the championship. So in the grand scheme of things, this blown call was pretty inconsequential looking back. But if you want something with crazy consequences, Game 5 of the 1976 Finals, on the other hand, featured maybe the most impactful blown call in NBA history. If you look on Basketball Reference, this is marked as the greatest game ever played, as it was a triple overtime thriller that probably deserves a video of its own for how much that happened during these OT periods, but none of those overtimes should have happened, as a ref missed one of the most obvious calls in NBA history that would have likely resulted in Phoenix winning the game. After trailing by 18 points early on, the Suns climbed all the way back and tied the game in the final minute of regulation thanks to an end-one layup by Paul Westphal. The Celtics then came down and missed a jumper, but Dave Cowens got called for a loose ball foul while fighting for a rebound. Honestly, this is something that you don't normally see called in a crucial moment like this, but it happened right in front of the official. He didn't really have any choice but to make the call. Curtis Perry went 1 for 2 at the line to briefly give Phoenix the lead, but then John Havlicek got fouled and went 1 for 2 himself to knot the game at 95. Despite letting up an offensive rebound on the miss, the Suns got a stop with 3 seconds left and had a chance to win the game. But Phoenix then turned the ball over on the inbound, which led to one of the craziest no calls I've ever seen. Since the turnover happened with just a couple seconds left on the clock, most Celtics players began walking to their bench to get ready for OT, but Paul Silas went right up to the ref and tried to call a timeout. The only problem was that Boston was out of timeouts. This should have resulted in a technical foul on the Celtics and a free throw for the Suns with 1 second left. What's so crazy about this is that the ref who called the foul on Dave Cowens for fighting for the rebound was the same one who somehow missed this timeout, even though Silas was directly in front of him signaling for one. As a result of this insane no call, the game wound up going to triple overtime and the Celtics eventually won. They would go on to take Game 6 as well and ultimately win the championship. Out of all of the moments we looked at in this video, none were more impactful than this one. Had they made the correct call, the Suns very likely win this game and are up 3-2 heading back home for Game 6, putting them in the driver's seat to win the title. But since the ref seemingly went blind for a few seconds, the Suns were robbed of this amazing opportunity. Phoenix is still ringless as a franchise to this day. That could have been a different story if referee Richie Powers decided to properly do his job. This is definitely my pick for the craziest no call in the history of the league, but let me know in the comments if you guys think there's another play worthy of that title. Check out the rest of the content on my channel, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys next time.